For those that are unaware, idle up is a way of arming your quad that is a little bit different than standard. If you don't know what it is, then you should probably go check out Mr. Steele's video. He's got a really good one on the benefits of it and why he uses it. And it's something that I've always wanted to try. But there is a downside to idle up. Only one, as far as I'm aware, and it's a safety one. It basically means that if you do something wrong, it could be quite catastrophic. And I'm known for doing things wrong. So I wanted to use idle up, so I came up with a way to get around this kind of, this issue with idle up. So the way idle up works normally is when you arm, the quad spins up the motors, but the PID controller isn't active, so if you try and move the quad around, it stays completely still. It doesn't try and fight you, it doesn't think it's flying. And then when you flick the idle up switch, you can hear the difference there. That is the PID controllers are now kicked in. So there you go. So there's now two stages to the arming process. There's arming and then there's idle upping. So when the idle up's on, so when you idle up, the quad fights you. So the biggest problem with idle up is when you arm, the motors spin up, the throttle isn't active. And then the idle up switch, when you flick it, no matter what the throttle is on, it will jump straight to that throttle. So if you accidentally arm, and then something hits this throttle and it goes up and you don't realize, and then you idle up, that goes straight to whatever throttle setting that's on, which means your quad is going to go straight into the air and possibly into your face, or even worse, into someone else's face. I made a few changes to how idle up works, which kind of negates this weird safety issue. So I'll show you what happens to the quad when I use my idle up. If I arm, so throttle does nothing. If I accidentally have the throttle up and it's not on the bottom, and I switch the idle up on, nothing happens. So that's a safety in itself. That doesn't actually enable the idle up because the throttle isn't down. So if you enable idle up, and then as you bring the throttle down to the bottom, you notice the change in pitch, which means that now it's armed fully and the idle up is engaged, and now it works normally. So that's pretty cool. That means that you have no risk between arming, throttling. If you accidentally switch the idle up on, maybe you didn't mean to, if the throttle's up, nothing will happen. If the throttle, as you move the throttle to the bottom, you can hear it change, the idle up's initiated. Right, so how do we sort out this idle up safety? The first thing we have to do is, taken from the Steele tutorial as a base, you will know that you have two special functions, which are the override channel 1 on your idle up switch. So in his case, and I've done the same thing, he's got a 3-position switch and he's using the middle position as the idle up, and then up and down basically disables the throttle, which is what these switches here are doing. So if I press SA up, switch A up position, it overrides the throttle to -100. So first of all, we're going to delete both of these. Right, with those deleted, what we actually want to use is logical switches. Now these allow you to make switches that aren't necessarily based on the hardware, they can be based on a lot of different values. The first logical switch we're going to do, you can ignore 1, 2 and 3 on my screen here, they're for other things that I've got. You could start with L01 if you want, or you can put it in L04 if you want to follow along exactly. And we want an A is less than X as the function. And for the value 1, we want the throttle, so you can click on value 1 and then just move the throttle stick, and that will select throttle. On value 2, we want a really low number, so we want it to be around... right, well the best thing you can do here is, because you want it to be where your throttle's at the bottom, but that's not necessarily -100, but you can see L04 in the top here. If you put the throttle right the way down to the bottom and then move this up, when that goes bold, that means that this switch is activated, which means that the throttle is less than 97. So I'm going to give it a bit of wiggle room there. So I'm going to set -95. So you can see when I move the throttle down all the way to the bottom, the logical switch L04 is bold. That means that this switch is active. So now we have a way of knowing when throttle is down at the bottom. It means L04 is on. For L05, we now want this to be an AND, which means that it checks that both of these values are true. And the first thing is the logical switch that we just set up, which in my case was on logical switch 04, which at the moment is on. As if I move the throttle up, it's off, so that's fine. But then we also want to check if this switch is in the middle. So we can just move the switch to the middle and you get SA dash. That means the middle position of this 3-position switch. So now we know when the throttle's at the bottom and this switch is in the middle. That means L05 will be active. So you can sort of see what's happening here with the logical progression. L06 now is what we use to determine whether the quad is armed. So we need another AND. Value 1, we will have the arm switch, which in my case is SF. Actually, I think mine's on a logical switch, but yours can just be any switch. So just hit the arm switch on that one, and that will give you the correct switch. So anytime you're on one of these values, you can just press whatever switch or dial, and it will give you the value. It will give you the switch. So in your case, maybe you need to move a switch for arm. In my case, it's on logical switch 1. Okay, and value 2 needs to be the switch that we just created, which was L05. Okay, so now with those 3 logical switches, we have a way to know if we have the throttle down to the bottom, we have the idle up switch in the middle, and that we are armed. With all 3 of those active, then we can sort of set a value that is to tell us that idle up is on. So to do that, we need one final logical switch. So in L07, we're going to do something called a sticky, which is right at the end. So you can just scroll all the way to the end in the functions. Now value 1 needs to be the logical switch we just made, which was L06, which was a combination of armed, idle up, and throttle all the way down. And what this does is it means that as soon as that switch is active, so the very first time that happens, then this sticky will stay on. Now we need that because if we were just to use L06, which is the combination of all 3 to determine if our idle up is on, as soon as we move the throttle up, it turns off, which is bad because that means that as soon as you throttle up, the idle up switch would flick off. So the sticky is just a way to sort of make that stay on. And then for when to turn it off, what we're going to use is the we're going to use the idle up switch and then set it to the middle position and then invert. So it means if that switch moves to any position that isn't the middle position, then turn idle up off. And that's it. So now we can look at this, we can look at it happening here. You can see all these different values, and what happens is as we throttle down, the first logical switch is on. If the idle up's in the middle, the second one's on. If we're also armed, the third one's on, and now that means the sticky's on. So now when we move around, the other 3 go off, which is fine because the bottom one is on, and that's the switch we're going to use for the idle up. If you flick the idle up switch, this turns off. So that's perfect for what we want. And now in the special functions where you had the original overrides on this switch, instead of that, we're going to use the logical switch L07, override channel 1 to -100 when L07 is off. So we invert that, and that is it. There we go. So now your idle up will be safe. One last look at the idle up that we've just set up. So now we can arm the quad. Nothing moving, turn idle up on, nothing happens until we move the throttle down, and then you can hear the difference in the quad, and now it's on. That's just something that I wanted to share with you guys. Hopefully you'll find it useful. If you're considering using idle up like I was, but maybe were a bit put off by that potential catastrophic feature in the idle up setup, then hopefully this will help you out. Okay. I'll give you another video soon about what I think of idle up, because now I'll be able to try it for reals and compare it against air mode. Alright, take it easy, bye bye.